Hey, and welcome to this week's episode of The People's Report, News for the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today is November 12th, 2025, and I am here again by myself. Why is Trump trying to feed people only 65% of what they need to eat? If ICE didn't want to be shot at, ran by vehicles, or assaulted, why are they kidnapping people? Should a sovereign nation submit to the will of a local police department? Who else is cutting jobs in favor of AI this week? What is the real motivation to ban trans athletes in sports? If your friend and neighbor were running in an election to make your life better, would it matter to you that they were a communist? If they have a budget of $962 billion annually, why do US soldiers have to rely on food banks to eat? Are you scared of terrorists? What if the next terrorist threat came from outer space? All these topics and more in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps in the episode description.
Well, don't feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, because it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity, I need you and you need me. Solidarity, 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 solidarity.
Trump administration again asks Supreme Court intervene on order for full SNAP benefits. November 10th, 2025, via NPR. The Trump administration has notified the U.S. Supreme Court that it still wants to fight a lower court ruling requiring full SNAP benefits be paid for November. The move comes after an appeals court late Sunday refused another government attempt to deny full funding for the nation's largest anti-hunger program. The administration's appeal to the High Court over the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, comes despite new efforts to end the federal shutdown, which would render the issue moot. At issue is an order from a federal judge in Rhode Island to increase SNAP payments from the 65% the government says it can afford to 100% of what SNAP recipients are entitled to. In its ruling, the appeals court said the harm from denying millions of people food aid would be immense, and it repeated the lower court finding that the funding gap could have been avoided. The record here shows that the government sat on its hands for nearly a month, unprepared to make partial payments, while people who rely on SNAP received no benefits a week into November and counting, the appeals court said. Federal judge in Rhode Island, John J. McConnell Jr., had accused the government of delaying payment for political purposes. The chaos of moves and countermoves has left states scrambling and heads spinning, and many SNAP enrollees remain uncertain how much of their benefit to expect for November, and when it will come. On Friday, after the administration said it would send full payments, even as it appealed the order to do so, a number of states immediately started sending out that money. Around the country, some participants started getting it on the debit-like cards they use to buy groceries. Then the Supreme Court late Friday granted a request to temporarily pause those full payments while the appeals court considered the issue more fully. Adding to the confusion, Trump administration officials on Saturday directed states to immediately undo any actions they had made to fully fund SNAP and only pay 65%. In a statement, the U.S. Department of Agriculture said such payments were unauthorized and threatened states that they may end up having to cover those costs themselves and facing financial penalties. In court papers, the state said they feared that the federal government may attempt to recoup funds from the states that the state's residents have used to feed themselves and their families. That could amount to hundreds of millions of dollars, they said, and would risk catastrophic operational disruptions for the states, with a consequent cascade of harms for their residents. The Facing Hunger food bank in Huntington, West Virginia, has tripled the volume of food distributions that are usual this time of year, according to CEO Cynthia Kirkhart. People are struggling, she says, and all the uncertainty has just exacerbated the pain. Breaking news update as of quite literally 5 minutes ago. For me, anyway, by the time you're watching this, it'll be different. The House of Representatives has voted to reopen the government and pass a bill that had previously shut down the government in its holdup. So we'll see what happens when Donald Trump actually signs this into law. I have to assume tomorrow morning, that'll be Thursday. When that happens, hopefully, we'll see the those payments, SNAP payments, get distributed, and employee pay for government employees get distributed, back pay get distributed, and furloughed employees hopefully also get paid. We'll have to see if that happens and how that happens and under what time frame. Personally, am I optimistic about the U.S. government paying its employees or delivering benefits to poor people? No. But the government shutdown has been, or technically speaking, will be over in a matter of hours. And what do we have to show for it? What does the working class have to show for it? Nothing, as usual. What do the Democrats have to show for it? Nothing. Who's surprised? What do the Republicans have to show for it? Honestly, not a whole lot, but they didn't have to give in to anything. The Democrats completely folded like a cheap shirt after 42 days or so and have won 0 concessions. But in the meantime, 40 million Americans have been moved into food insecurity. Who knows how many federal employees have not received pay for 2, 3 pay periods. Soldiers are not getting paid either. Big deal. And it's been a whole mess. Seems that the Affordable Care Act might be on its way out because that's still on the table for discussion, hence why the Democrats folded, allegedly. They were given some pinky promise. We'll see how that holds up. Come back to us in January or whenever. And that's about it. So what's happened? 40 million Americans who rely on government assistance to eat suitable amounts of food have been denied it and have been kicked around like a political hockey puck, and for no reason. The Democrats, if they weren't going to commit to winning concessions for the people, shouldn't have even tried. And the Republicans, we know, don't give a shit about poor people. Neither do the Democrats, of course. We're not a partisan group here. And we know that the Democrats are a capitalist party, a right-wing capitalist, imperialist party, who do not care about the working class in the slightest. Otherwise, they would not be a right-wing, imperial, or capitalist party. What they worship is capital, and that's why they're willing to help starve the American public through general inaction, and then, of course, through their general actions that create food insecurity here in the United States. And they're certainly willing to create food insecurity and starvation across the globe, especially in the global south. So we'll see what happens with these SNAP benefits. Trump, of course, is more than happy to not feed people and to deny them food when he could easily win some pretty big political points by distributing SNAP benefits. But of course, he doesn't view SNAP recipients as human beings. He, like most capitalists, view the working class as a force to exploit and to extract wealth from, as opposed to actual human beings with value who should be cared for and who should be cared about. Trump expresses zero interest in the working class, whether they're his voters or they aren't. That's all there is to it, especially non-white, especially non-male members of the working class. We know that the Hispanic working class he despises. Black people in the working class he doesn't care for. Women in the working class he doesn't care for unless he can get something from them sexually. So it's no surprise that he's trying to use food as a bargaining chip to starve out the American public, to try to win a few political points by getting them to hate the Democrats, which so far, from my perspective, has not really worked. The people who were going to hate the Democrats were going to do so regardless and now have more incentive to do so. The ones who weren't going to hate the Democrats and were going to blame this on the Republicans have done so and were going to do so either way. And now all that he has helped create is a situation in which the Democrats are seen once again as being the spineless, toothless cowards that they are, slugs in office, And that's what we've got for a government: Nazis and slugs. The People's Report and Solidarity TV is a grassroots independent news agency, so please consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Homeland Security fast-tracks expanded arrest powers off federal property. November 6, 2025, via Oregon Live. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security on Wednesday granted greater authority to the Federal Protective Service, whose mission is to protect federal buildings and property, to make arrests off of federal property, and target people who commit crimes while wearing masks. The new regulation was expected to go into effect in January, but the Homeland Security Department and Federal Protective Service pushed the date up, saying it's needed to address what they called a recent surge in security and public safety threats. Federal Protective Service officers have made arrests outside of Portland's U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement building amid nightly protests alongside federal officers from the Immigration Enforcement, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol Protection, and the Bureau of Prisons. The new regulation gives the Federal Protective Service the authority to arrest people who are off of federal property for the use of unauthorized drones, alleged disorderly conduct, the wearing of a mask or hood that conceals one's identity in the course of committing a crime, obstructing access to federal property, impeding federal officers, tampering with government technology such as electronic card readers, or creating any threat or hazard to federal property or staff. Those alleged crimes would be Class C misdemeanors, punishable by up to 30 days in jail, a fine of up to $5,000, or both. DHS is using every tool possible to protect the lives of our law enforcement as they face a surge in violence and lawlessness at many of our federal facilities. We've seen rampant violence against law enforcement, including our officers shot at, rammed by vehicles, assaulted, and threatened, Homeland Security spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin said in a statement. Under President Trump and Secretary Noem, we will not tolerate violence perpetuated by Antifa and other domestic extremists who are targeting federal property and law enforcement. In Portland, 38 people have been arrested and charged with either a federal felony or misdemeanor stemming from protests outside the ICE facility since June. In 23 of those arrests, people have been accused of assaulting a federal officer. Other charges have included destruction of government property, aiming a laser at government helicopters, failure to obey a lawful order, and arson. The majority of the arrests were made in June, none so far in November. Spencer Reynolds, Senior Counsel on Liberty and National Security for the Brennan Center for Justice, said in a report last month that the expanded scope of the Federal Protective Service has not been matched by the development of rules to ensure the agency's operations are legitimate and transparent. And he argued that Homeland Security has exploited the agency for political ends. He cited the agency's role in the 2020 federal crackdown on racial justice demonstrators outside of the downtown federal courthouse in Portland, and wrote that the Homeland Security's Inspector General has previously documented the lack of safeguards to prevent abuses by the Federal Protective Services. Reynolds said in a social media post Wednesday that the regulation relies on unproven, hyperbolic statements that threats to federal officers have increased. To anyone paying attention, the risks to First Amendment rights are significant, especially in light of the White House's directives that paint political dissent as Antifa terrorism, he wrote on Blue Sky. Last month, Robert Cantu, Deputy Director of the Federal Protective Service Region 10 that covers Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska, had to correct errors he made in a sworn declaration to a federal judge in Portland on the extent of federal officers' surge to protect Portland's ICE building. He initially wrote that the region had to assign 115 Federal Protective Service officers from other areas around the country to Portland to maintain a 24/7 operational tempo at the building since June. His subsequent brief clarified that the 115 was the number of deployments, not individual officers sent. There's actually been a total of 86 Federal Protective Service officers sent to the building from other regions, and no more than 31 officers at the building at any one night from June 15th through August 12th. Cantu testified last week on behalf of the federal government defending President Donald Trump's deployment of National Guard troops to protect Portland's ICE building in the South Waterfront neighborhood. He testified that he was disappointed by a lack of assistance from Portland police and estimated that police did not respond 40 times since June to requests by Federal Protective Service officers who reached out for help at the ICE building. Portland police supervisors countered that they have witnessed federal officers at the building using inappropriate and desperate force against passive demonstrators in violation of state and federal constitutional law. Portland Police Sergeant Kevin Allen said on Wednesday that the Police Bureau is aware of the Homeland Security announcement, but it does not change the actions of city officers. Portland police officers are still responsible for enforcing state laws and maintaining public safety, but will not engage in immigration enforcement, he said by email. The government crackdown on anti-ICE protesters is almost entirely fabricated and built upon lies and exaggerations. So far in the United States, there is no organized resistance to ICE. Neighborhoods and communities and individuals are stepping up to the plate and doing what they can. We've seen some mass protests in some large cities, and we probably would have seen, if they were ever covered, smaller protests in smaller locations. But the idea that ICE agents are at risk is frankly bullshit. The idea that government enforcement, law enforcement are at risk is bullshit. They're not. It's simply untrue. There are no Antifa squads running around attacking ICE facilities or ICE agents. Every single time we've seen something like this occur, it has been adventurous or non-political or non-politically motivated, such as the one gentleman who shot up an ICE facility recently and only hit ICE detainees, to our comrades a little while ago in Portland, back in 2018, I want to say, our Dutch comrade who died setting police or ICE vehicles on fire. Outside of impulsive acts of adventurism, which are rare, they're not under attack. So why then the police mobilization? It's simply that ICE is not accountable to anyone but the president, effectively, and they act as his Gestapo and as his personal private enforcers for ethnic cleansing in the United States. And in order to bolster the presence and in order to hyper-militarize immigration and customs enforcement, they have to invent a threat to combat, very much like what we saw with the militarization of police, very much like what we see with the warmongering against the Middle East and now against Venezuela, where we have to invent terrorists in order to pass things like the Patriot Act. Normal people would not tolerate masked goons running around their neighborhoods disappearing people. They would if they thought that they were addressing a legitimate threat, or if they thought that their excessive force, that the police excessive force was a legitimate reaction to violence. But it's not. It just simply is not happening. Should it happen is a different question. But the ICE is not under threat. The American people are not striking out against ICE. The kind of protests that we're seeing are people doing 80s themed dance parties outside of what is effectively a concentration camp. If this is what people were doing at Srebrenica, it would not have changed a single thing that happened there. But that is what we're doing here to combat ethnic cleansing in the United States. Liberals are dancing up in colorful outfits and making a mockery of resistance and making a mockery of the abductees who are imprisoned in these ethnic prison camps. There's nothing more to it than that. And while I acknowledge that there may be some merit to the idea of nonviolent, peaceful protest that disparages the law enforcement by creating a scene in which the American public gets to see law enforcement doing violent crackdowns on very clearly peaceful activists is one thing, like when the gentleman in the frog suit got pepper sprayed a little while back, and a lot of people went into an uproar because obviously a man in an inflatable suit is no threat to the police. But it has really just become a scene of spectacle, a scene of party, if you will, in which members of the public who disagree with party politics or with the Republican Party's politics decide that it's an opportunity for them to act out, but not actually resist and not actually interfere. If people were blocking ICE driveways, instead of standing across the street and letting ICE buses into the facility to deport people, that would be legitimate resistance. And that would also be illegal, and what these law enforcement officers are there to, I don't say defend against, but there to oppose, would be people blocking access to federal facilities. But up until the American public is actually willing to commit to their political beliefs and actually willing to put their time, their money, and their bodies on the line for their neighbors, nothing's going to happen. All we're going to see is a continued bolstering of police go unchallenged, all in order to make oppression of the American public, and more specifically of the non-American public, our immigrant brothers and sisters, made to make that easier and more manageable, and to make people more and more scared of doing anything about it. Here at Solidarity TV, we're a grassroots organization. That means we exist by and for viewers like you. In order to support us, become a member at solidaritytelevision.org. Seneca Nation calls out Salamanca Police Chief, Cattaraugus County DA, for contemplating hostility towards Seneca Nation. October 31st, 2025, via SNI News. The Seneca Nation is demanding action from City of Salamanca officials in light of a recent exchange between the city's police chief and the Cattaraugus County District Attorney, which contemplates hostility and even criminal charges against Seneca Nation marshals enforcing nation executive orders seeking to remove and exclude known drug dealers and users from nation lands. In a recent email exchange, Salamanca Chief of Police Jamie Deck asked Cattaraugus County District Attorney Lori Riemann whether the Salamanca Police Department could entertain potential charges for kidnapping, etc., against Seneca Nation marshals if they forcefully removed individuals who are the subject of nation exclusion orders from Seneca territory. Riemann replied, "I think we can definitely charge them with crimes if they remove them." The communication between Salamanca Police Chief and Cattaraugus County District Attorney shows a blatant and complete lack of respect for the sovereignty of the Seneca Nation, and I won't stand for it, said Seneca Nation President John Conrad Seneca. The police chief and district attorney should be communicating and working with the nation as partners. Instead, they were scheming on potential actions that would be severely detrimental to the relationship between the city, the county, and the Seneca Nation. The email exchange came just weeks after a Seneca elder was murdered in his Salamanca home, with rumors that the suspect was under the influence of illegal drugs. President Seneca and his predecessors have issued multiple executive orders excluding known drug dealers and users from nation territory and have moved to evict tenants at several properties on nation lands where criminal activities known to and proven to have taken place. The Seneca Nation will stop at nothing to eliminate illegal drug activity on our territories, including in Salamanca, which is on our land, President Seneca continued. The drug trafficking activity, the drug dealers, and those who support them are a threat not just to the Seneca people, but to our neighbors as well. The law enforcement leaders of Salamanca and Cattaraugus County should assist us in stopping what is going on here. Instead, they're discussing ways to line up against us. What will it take for them to wake up? More crime and violence? Upon learning of the exchange between Deck and Riemann, President Seneca sent a letter to Salamanca Mayor Sandy Mageria, demanding action from the city's leaders. "I want to be crystal clear with you," the letter states. "Neither I nor the nation's council will tolerate interference by the city or the city police in the internal affairs of the Seneca Nation government to remove drug traffickers from our territory. The nation has many options available to prevent Chief Deck and his police force from interfering in our sovereign right of self-government. We expect that you will take corrective action against Chief Deck, who appears to be running interference for drug traffickers, and provide an assurance that the nation's efforts to protect the people of the Allegheny territory will not be disrupted." Now, unlike our comrade Riley, I did not grow up on a reservation or in a Native American community or sovereign nation. So my understanding of the way that these nations operate is not the greatest. Certainly not the greatest out of our hosts here. My first takeaway, however, of this discussion is that I'm not certain it is a very progressive thing to do to remove drug users and drug dealers from a community through law enforcement. Now, certainly, I'm never going to be backing up any New York Police Department, and certainly not against indigenous communities who have the right to police, for lack of a better term, their own communities and their own territories of which, of course, the American public has robbed them of. But I'm not sure that their approach to the drug problem is necessarily the right one. To me, it sounds like a overly militant solution to a problem that has material and systemic roots that cannot be solved through removal. We're never going to get rid of drugs in the community by removing drug dealers. Drugs are, in many cases, a symptom of poverty. They are used to alleviate the pains of poverty and neglect. And this is why drug and alcohol use are so prevalent on or within Native American communities. It is because of the sheer poverty and neglect and abuse that they suffer at the hands of the American empire, that they have suffered in the past and continue to suffer in the present. So addressing these problems through the exile of drug users and even of drug dealers, I'm not sure that is the most pro-social way to solve the problem. Of course, the solution to the problem is equity and equality, land back, and indigenous rights across the Americas, and across the United States in particular. So, I don't expect the Seneca Nation of New York to be able to address that very easily. As for the sovereign issue, it is ridiculous that any local police department should feel that they have any sort of say over the sovereign nation of the Native Americans. Indigenous Americans are so-called that because they are indigenous. This is their territory that we are thieves of, robbers of, squatters, colonists, settlers, whatever you want to call us, and we have stolen the land from the people. We've stolen it, we've driven them off, and thrown them into what is effectively concentration camps. Now, sure, reservations are maybe a slight step above from a traditional concentration camp, depending on your point of view. But it's certainly in no way freedom. It's not liberty. It's not sovereignty. It is just a kinder form of oppression, a gentler hand around the throat instead of hand in hand going through life. So the local police departments, thinking that they have any right to infringe on Native American sovereignty, is just another classic page out of the colonial handbook. The idea that American or Western laws supersede that of the indigenous peoples of America. And frankly, they shouldn't. The American public, again, the very foundation of America is built on settler colonialism, genocide, racism, white supremacy, ethnic cleansing, mass murder. Even to the point where the studio is built on top of land that was ethnically cleansed by George Washington personally, and who ordered the eradication of the Native Americans from this community. So this is the backdrop of the struggle between the local police department and the Seneca Nation. And while I don't agree that the Seneca Nation's approach to the drug problem is a correct one, they have more right to determine what is and is not the correct one than any local police department, or really any law enforcement agency in the United States, which is in its own way totally illegitimate. It reminds me a bit of the Oka crisis in Canada in the 90s, in which local government decided that they had authority over the local indigenous peoples, and that boiled over into an armed standoff that lasted for quite a while and resulted in a young woman getting, I believe she was 14 years old, getting bayoneted by a Canadian soldier while she was holding an infant. The Oka crisis, we don't have time to get into the details and the history of it. I would love to. I'm sure Riley has some wonderful insight on that as well. Look it up if you have the opportunity. It's a very, very interesting page in Native American, Indigenous, and in Western American history, the white American history. And it looks like we could be set up for some sort of repeat here or something similar to that in New York, with the Seneca people saying that they are willing to take any actions necessary to enforce their own sovereignty against the white militia that is the local police department. The struggle of the Native Americans is ongoing. It is no different from the struggle of the Palestinian people, who are second-class citizens in their own land, being replaced by European settlers who have ethnically cleansed them and orchestrated genocide. Now, over 90% of Native Americans were murdered by white settlers, and who also then waged numerous wars against them in the late 1800s. And the conquest of the New World was an explicitly white nationalist, white supremacist machine in operation in order to steal the land as capitalist enterprise. Now, at the time, capitalism was still under development, so it might be incorrect to expressly call colonialism a capitalist enterprise expressly in those terms, but for all intents and purposes, it was capitalist enterprise in order to seize the land of the Native Americans as private property to use for resource extraction in order to enrich a few in the old world. And that goes on today. Our relationship with the land is very exploitative. It is one of possession, not communion. And our relationship with each other is one of possession and exploitation, and not communion. So these problems will be solved when we approach it with honesty, when we approach the existence of the United States of America with honesty, rather than celebrating it as some sort of beacon of hope, of virtue, of democracy, of liberty. And when we realize that all of those so-called American values are predicated on, built on, and continue to rely on the exploitation, marginalization, and genocide of the Native Americans, we're not going to be able to get anywhere until we address that. Hey comrades, this week's book suggestion is Revolutionary Suicide, the autobiography of Huey P. Newton. It tells a story about how he became the co-founder of the Black Panther Party. IBM cutting thousands of jobs in the fourth quarter, November 4th, 2025 via CNBC. IBM said Tuesday that it'll lay off a small percentage of its employees in the current quarter. In the fourth quarter, we are executing an action that will impact a low single-digit percentage of our global workforce, a spokesperson told CNBC. While this may impact some U.S.-based roles, we anticipate that our U.S. employment will remain flat year over year. IBM employed 270,000 people at the end of 2024, according to its latest annual report. A 1% cut to the headcount would represent the loss of 2,700 jobs. Other technology companies have been slimming down lately, with executives looking for ways to improve productivity by increasing reliance on artificial intelligence tools. In October, Amazon said that it would cut 14,000 corporate employees, while Facebook parent Meta said its AI unit would get rid of 600 workers. On October 22nd, IBM delivered stronger earnings than expected, thanks to a 10% jump in revenue from software, meeting consensus. CEO Arvind Krishna has helped IBM expand its revenue base since he replaced Gina Rometty in 2020. The hardware, software, and services provider said goodbye to some marketing and communications staff members in March 24. AI agents took over the work of about 200 people in human resources, leading the company to bring on more salespeople and software developers, Krishna told the Wall Street Journal in May. More job cuts in favor of AI. Who could have seen this coming? Honestly, I'm not even sure how much more there is to say about this at this point. Cutting jobs in order to replace people with AI is fundamentally, on its own, actually a good thing. The fewer people who have to work, automation and all that, is a good thing. But the problem is that in our capitalist society, labor is not a contribution, but rather something to be exploited. Workers, thus, do not contribute to projects, and workers do not add the sweat of their own brow for the value of the work. They do so in order to get back the pittance of that they are paid as their wages. That, of course, gets taken from their labor value. When a person goes to work, what they contribute to that effort does not get paid back to them. It mostly gets stolen by their bosses and by shareholders and such, and that is their excess value. So when a product gets sold, we'll use McDonald's as an example because probably all of you have been there. When you buy a cheeseburger, which is now so expensive, I have no idea what happened with McDonald's prices. But we'll say cheeseburger, we'll go back to the dollar menu era. Say cheeseburger's $1. We'll never go back to the dollar menu era. But let's say we did, and cheeseburger's $1. How many cheeseburgers can be made in an hour by a McDonald's employee? 100? We'll find, say, 60, and it takes them 1 minute to make a McDonald's burger from very start to finish, which it doesn't. If I remember correctly, it takes like 42 seconds just to cook the patty, and then everything else can go together in seconds. Well, let's say 1 minute. They can make one burger per minute, so you can make 60 burgers in an hour. Burgers being sold for $1, so that's $60 from just one burger per minute. And of course, they're making more than that, but we're using simple maths for simple reasons. If a person can produce 60 burgers in an hour, and those burgers are being sold for $1 a piece, their labor value is about $60 per hour. Now we'll say 50% of that is their cost, is the cost of product. So, and again, I'm really, really, really simplifying economics for the sake of this illustration. So they make then $30. $30 is their value. We get $30 is the value of the goods, the natural produce of the earth, and then $30 is the labor that goes into making it. Do they get that money? No. They get, back when burgers were $1, you'd get $7.25. We'll round up to 10, again, for simplicity's sake. So let's say McDonald's workers making $10 an hour, making 60 burgers an hour at $1 a piece, factoring out the expense that it incurs to get those products into the building. We're now looking at a revenue of $30, then minus 10 to the employee. That's a $20 profit. What that profit is money or value that has been created by the worker that the worker is not being given. The worker is being stolen from the worker. And in exchange, they get 1/3 of their value. Again, using these numbers, which are inaccurate and incredibly simplified. So at best, this theoretical McDonald's employee is being given 1/3 of their value, being paid at 1/3 of what they deserve. Now, if we were to automate this employee and create the Burger Maker 1000, it would not have to be paid at all. So then the profits would be $30 an hour. If those profits were being fairly distributed to employees, the fact that the Burger Man is now being replaced by a robot is great, because the Burger Man would then be getting that profit or getting that revenue, and he wouldn't have to actually be making the burgers. So reduction in work results in a much healthier, happier lifestyle. In real life, however, that automation now means that this guy doesn't have a job. So now he doesn't have money. He can't buy food. He can't pay rent. He can't pay for transportation. He can't pay for healthcare. And if he doesn't have a job, his healthcare is probably not there. It's probably tied to his work, like millions of Americans. So the end result is that he is now in a much, much worse state of being due to automation, when the alternative should be that the automation reduces his workload at no cost to himself. Because that $30 that the robot is creating could just go to the people at large instead of to the man in charge. And this is why automation is a problem. This is why, even if AI were a good product, and it isn't, this is why it's bad for the workers. And it won't be until we address this inequality, this relationship to labor that we have, in which the working class generates wealth for the owning class at their own great expense, and often driving them into poverty, so that way the owning class can get richer and richer and richer. If it weren't for this system of exploitation, automation would be great. I would love to have to work significantly less than I do. Not entirely true. I actually do like my job, but it'd be nice to know that if I were sick, I wouldn't have to go in. That maybe I wouldn't have to wake up as early for it, that kind of thing. If the benefits of working were distributed back to me or even to my neighbors, because people who can't work still deserve food, housing, clothing, healthcare, transportation, etc. They deserve everything that I deserve. And all working people of the world deserve to have a high standard of living, high quality, healthy, happy, fulfilling lives that they are denied by the ruling class because they have to work in order to get back those crumbs from the value that they're generating. And this is the problem, again, with automation. I know I've said it multiple times by now, but the problem is that automation increases profits for business owners and shareholders and decreases the quality of life for workers who can be replaced by robots and then be left hung out to dry. Their options then are to get involved in work that pays less, that is perhaps more dangerous, that is, I hesitate to say less respectable, because all labor is respectable. The garbage man, first of all, probably makes more than me, but the sanitation workers is often seen as being a low class, low level job. Average sanitation worker does more to prevent illness and save lives than probably every doctor combined, with the possible exception of Jonas Salk. So, but they'll have to agree to work worse conditions, because again, safety is an expense that capitalists, the owners, and the owning class and business owners don't want to spend and will cheap out whenever possible, because that cuts into their profits. So automation reduces quality of life by forcing people into poverty and forcing them to accept terms and deals that they would not otherwise accept in order to continue to have any sort of quality of life. Again, food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and healthcare are the big ones. That they are denied when their jobs get automated because the American society is not one that cares about people, and it only cares about capital. Hey comrades, remember the words of Chairman Mao, civilize the mind and make savage the body. So here's a suggestion for the wintertime. If it makes sense for you, go right for the shovel and ignore the snowblower. Olympics organizers reportedly planning full ban on transgender women in women's events. November 10, 2025, via the Pink News. The organizers of the Olympic Games are reportedly working towards a blanket ban on trans women in women's sports. The International Olympic Committee, the IOC, may follow the lead of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee by banning trans women from competing in all women's events, according to Sky News and other outlets. Olympic chiefs are also said to be looking at prohibiting athletes with differences of sex development from taking part in the Games. The changes are being considered following a presentation to IOC members by the director of their Health, Medicine, and Science Department, Dr. Jane Thornton. She is reported to have highlighted the potential physical advantages trans women have in women's sports, despite other studies showing that they have no such edge at an elite level. IOC members were also informed on how sex testing, which is used by the World Athletics, works. A ban on trans women could be introduced in time for the Los Angeles Games in 2028, although the topic is yet to be presented to a full IOC session where a decision is likely to be made. In July, in a move that aligned with an anti-trans executive order signed by President Donald Trump, the U.S. Olympic Committee quietly changed its eligibility rules with a short, vaguely worded paragraph outlining the new policy. The revised policy stated that the committee was committed to protecting opportunities for athletes participating in sport and will work with the International Olympic Committee, the International Paralympic Committee, and the national governing bodies of each Olympic sport to ensure that women have a fair and safe competition environment consistent with Executive Order 1400 God, I don't know why I messed that one up. Executive Order 14201 and Stevens Olympic Amateur Sports Act. The move follows IOC President Kirsty Coventry vowing to protect the female category and athletes. Following the controversy surrounding boxer Imani Khalif at the Paris Olympics last year, as well as policies from athletic bodies, particularly in the U.S., banning transgender women from competing in women's sport, Coventry was clear that women's sport had to be protected. Algerian Imani Khalif, who won the gold medal in the women's 65-kilogram event, is not trans. Firstly, when it comes to Imani Khalif, the Algerian boxer who was discriminated against under allegations of being a trans woman, it was perhaps one of the most unsportsmanlike things I've seen from the Olympics. First of all, I don't understand how you can get to be an Olympic-level boxer, get hit, and then freak out about how your opponent must be cheating because you got hit that hard. If I were an Olympic-level boxer, and I'm not because I'm not good at boxing, and also I don't like to get punched in the face, if I made it that far and got hit so hard that I was like, oh my God, this person is out of this world, I would maybe quit. If there are people out there who punch so hard that you think that they have to be cheating and that they can't be a woman because they punched you out, maybe don't be an Olympic boxer. I digress. I don't know what the Italian woman's situation was exactly, but if you're going to cry about getting punched in the face at Olympic boxing, don't be an Olympic boxer. If you're, I don't know, an Olympic gymnast, yeah, complain about if your opponent punches you in the face. Definitely complain about that. But come on, boxing, grow up. But the Imani Khalif so-called scandal is really, at its core, not even necessarily about trans rights. It is about misogyny and enforcing traditional beauty standards onto women, especially non-white women. Imani Khalif does not have, her physical appearance does not necessarily match Western beauty standards. There's nothing wrong with that. Women, people in general, should not be expected to match beauty standards. Everyone's body is different, and it's unreasonable to expect that. It is unreasonable to push beauty standards onto people who will not naturally conform, and it's brutal to enforce it on people who have to change their physical structure in order to conform, like we see a lot in the South of Korea. And of course in other places, just the South of Korea always sticks out to me due to the high percentage of body modification that young women experience there. And we see this enforcement of beauty standards onto women, especially across the Middle East, where the European beauty standards don't always match the traditional appearance of Middle Eastern women. And so we see high demand for nose jobs and such. This is especially brutal on African women and on Black women in America, whose body types may not naturally conform to white Eurocentric beauty standards, because of course our beauty standards are colonial. They are Eurocentric. They do enforce this idea that white people are naturally more beautiful than people who are not white. And in order to achieve beauty, you have to match what white people look like. And to do that, you can either play the genetic lottery and win, which a lot of people do. Even in Europe, a lot of white people play the genetic lottery, and some of them don't win, some of them do. Or you have to pay for treatments that will make you conform to the standard. And that is cruel. It's colonial, especially on women in the global South, but men as well. And it's just not fair. And it's frankly hateful towards women. And we saw this illustrated very strongly with Imani Khalif, who, after winning, had to prove her ness, not through genetics, but through displays of traditional femininity, where she was on the cover of magazines in very feminine clothing, high levels of makeup, which is fine if that's what a person prefers. What is not fine is having to enforce that as being the identity of a woman and forcing women to conform to these standards of beauty in order to be counted as women. And that is a good half of the tragedy that befell Imani Khalif, is that because she did not conform to these standards, either through physical appearance or through presentation, where she did not dress or behave or present the very feminine image, she was discounted as being a woman altogether. And of course, like the article discusses, this is blatant transmisogyny and transphobia. It's a hatred of trans people. Like I said last week, excluding trans people from sports makes no sense to me. If you're getting beaten in sports, chances are it's not because you're against a trans person, it's because you're against someone who's better than you. I've been beaten by women in sports many times, and I've beaten women in sports probably about the same number of times, maybe a little less. And it had nothing to do with sex segregation and nothing to do with our sex at birth, but everything to do with the fact that I'm better than some women at sports, and other women are better than me at sports. That's all there is to it. So especially when you get to this elite level, the differences just don't matter. And we know this from studies that really trans women are not going to perform better than cis women at the same sports, especially not at that level. You don't get to Olympic level without extraordinary amounts of natural talent and effort and training. Imani Khalif did not get to be a gold star or gold medal boxer because she was alleged to be trans, which of course she isn't. She got there because she's good at boxing. I'm sure she could go many rounds with male boxers as well. No one lost to her because she was secretly born a man. They lost to her because she was better. And same thing happens to every athlete. They lose because they're playing someone better or someone who outplayed them, especially in team sports. Maybe the other team isn't better, but they outplayed you. Maybe you're in a one-on-one sport, the person who beat you didn't do so because they're necessarily better, but they beat you. They outperformed you at that time. Being trans is not a cheat code to being a better athlete. It's not a cheat code to beating women in sports, and it certainly does not give one an advantage in sports, certainly not at the Olympic level. And the fears that people have about trans people are just largely unfounded. Again, we talked about this a lot last week. But I'd like to point out once again how strongly correlated this is with misogyny. I have not seen a single news article complain about trans men in men's sports at all. In fact, if I remember correctly, the NCAA standard is that trans men can compete in women's sports or men's sports, and trans women can't compete in either. Or no, I think trans women can compete in men's sports only. So the fear isn't about trans people. The fear is about trans women specifically. And it comes back to this idea, the misogynistic idea that, first of all, that women are vulnerable and that they need to be protected, and that men are predatory and will go so far as to go through the complete transition in order to prey on women, when we know that they don't have to because they do it all the time already without transitioning. And the fear is that, or not the fear, but the situation is that people want women to conform to a set standard, and trans women largely do not, and that scares people. And maybe even scares isn't even the right word, but that is the core of it, is this hatred and distaste for women and the natural presentation of women. And quite frankly, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that many men feel disgusted by the idea that some women might exist who aren't sexually desirable to them. I think that is a root cause of a lot of the trans misogyny and transphobia, especially directed at trans women, is that men who are transphobic men are not view women almost exclusively as objects for sexual desire, and people who get in the way of that are seen as an enemy. And so the disgust, and of course this is strongly related to homophobia as well, the idea that, oh, well, this woman is secretly a man, and that would be gay to treat her as a woman because I only see women as objects, as receptacles for my sexual intentions, and that's gay. So, I think that has a lot to do with it, whether or not people acknowledge it. And just this idea that trans women also are, I don't want to say selling out masculinity, but the idea, I think a lot of men in particular, are so disgusted by the identity of womanhood and with the feminine in general. And again, I think a lot of that does go back to homophobia and our general standards being off the mark and misogyny in general. That the idea that in their mind, that a man would betray the brotherhood, so to speak, by becoming a woman is so backwards to what they want to believe, and because it inherently denies the superiority of men, that they react aggressively and violently towards it. I guess that's my own philosophizing on that, I guess. But the conclusion is Iman Khalif is a woman and always has been. The allegations of her being trans, of course, were invented by athletic opponents in order to discredit her capability, largely, I think, because white European athletes were displeased by the idea of being beaten by an Arab woman. I'm not sure if she's Arab or if she was the people of Algeria, the Berbers and Amazighs, I think. I'm not sure what exactly her ethnic identity is. But in European eyes, broadly, brown. And being beaten by a brown Muslim woman is strongly off-putting, and it denies white superiority inherently. And I think that that's a big motivation for the besmirching of Iman Khalif, and the fact that she was a very successful woman who did not conform to white, cishet, European beauty standards. And so the interest in destroying her reputation and destroying her as an athlete and barring her from competing again in order to protect white fragility is the real truth of that story. Hey guys, if you like this show, follow us on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and anywhere you can find a podcast. YouTube quietly erased more than 700 videos documenting Israeli human rights violations. November 4th, 2025, via The Intercept. A documentary featuring mothers surviving Israel's genocide in Gaza. A video investigation uncovering Israel's role in the killing of a Palestinian-American journalist. Another video revealing Israel's destruction of Palestinian homes in the occupied West Bank. YouTube surreptitiously deleted all these videos in early October by wiping the accounts that posted them from its website, along with their channel's archives. The accounts belong to three prominent Palestinian human rights groups, Al-Haq, Al-Mizan Center for Human Rights, and the Palestinian Center for Human Rights. The move came in response to a U.S. government campaign to stifle accountability for alleged Israeli war crimes against Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. The Palestinian group's YouTube channels hosted hours of footage documenting and highlighting alleged Israeli government violations of international law in both Gaza and the West Bank, including the killing of Palestinian civilians. After the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants and charged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Secretary Yoav Gallant with war crimes in Gaza, the Trump administration escalated its defense of Israel's actions by sanctioning ICC officials and targeting people and organizations that work with the court. YouTube, which is owned by Google, confirmed to The Intercept that it deleted the group's accounts as a direct result of State Department sanctions against the group after a review. The Trump administration leveled the sanctions against the organizations in September over their work with the International Criminal Court in cases charging Israeli officials of war crimes. According to Google's sanctions compliance publisher policy, Google publisher products are not eligible for any entities or individuals that are restricted under applicable trade sanctions and export compliance laws. Al-Mizan, a human rights organization in Gaza, told The Intercept that its YouTube channel was abruptly terminated this year on October 7th without prior notification. The West Bank-based Al-Haq's channel was deleted on October 3rd, spokesperson for the group said, with a message from YouTube that its content violates our guidelines. The Palestinian Center for Human Rights, which the UN describes as the oldest human rights organization in Gaza, said in a statement that YouTube's move protects perpetrators from accountability. The three human rights groups' account terminations cumulatively amount to the erasure of more than 700 videos, according to an Intercept tally. The deleted videos range in scope from investigations, such as an analysis of the Israeli killing of American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, to the testimonies of Palestinians tortured by Israeli forces, and documentaries like The Beach, about children playing on a beach who were killed by an Israeli strike. Some videos are still available through copies saved on the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine or on alternate platforms such as Facebook and Vimeo. The wiping only affected the group's official channels. Videos which were produced by the nonprofits but hosted on alternate YouTube channels remain active. No cumulative index of videos deleted by YouTube is available, however, and many appear to not be available elsewhere online. Videos posted elsewhere online, the groups fear, could soon be targeted for deletion because many of the platforms hosting them are also US-based services. The ICC itself began exploring using service providers outside the US. Al-Haq said it will also be looking for alternatives outside the US and outside of American companies to host their works. YouTube isn't the only US tech company blocking Palestinian rights groups from using its services. The Al-Haq spokesperson said in MailChimp that the mailing list service also deleted the group's account in September. MailChimp and its parent company did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Both the US and Israeli governments have long shielded themselves from the ICC and accountability for their alleged war crimes. Neither country is party to the Rome Statute, an international treaty that established the court. In November of 2024, the ICC prosecutors issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, charging the leaders with intentionally starving civilians by blocking aid from entering Gaza. Both the Biden and Trump administrations rejected the legitimacy of these warrants. Since his re-election, Trump has taken a more aggressive posture against accountability for Israel. In the early days of his second term, Trump renewed sanctions against the ICC and issued new, more severe measures against court officials and anyone accused of aiding their efforts. In September, in a new order, he specifically sanctioned the 3 Palestinian groups. The U.S. moves followed Israel's own designation of Al-Haq as a terrorist organization in 2021 and an online smear campaign by pro-Israeli activists attempting to link Palestinian Center for Human Rights with militant groups. The sanctions freeze the organization's assets in the U.S. and bar sanctioned individuals from traveling to the country. Federal judges have already issued preliminary injunctions in 2 cases in favor of plaintiffs who argued the sanctions had violated their First Amendment rights. Like many tech firms, YouTube has shown a ready willingness to comply with the demands from both the Trump administration and Israel. YouTube coordinated with a campaign organized by Israeli tech workers to remove social media content deemed critical of Israel. At home, Google, YouTube's parent company, secretly handed over personal Gmail account information to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement in an attempt to detain a pro-Palestinian student organizer. Even before Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza, YouTube had been accused of unevenly applying its community guidelines to censor Palestinian voices while withholding similar scrutiny from pro-Israel content. Such trends continued during the war, according to a Wired report. Earlier this year, YouTube shut down the official account of the Addameer Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association. The move came after pressure from UK lawyers from Israel, who wrote to YouTube to point out that the organization had been sanctioned by the State Department. Whitson warned that YouTube's capitulation could set a precedent, pushing other tech companies to bend to censorship. They are basically allowing the Trump administration to dictate what information they share with the global audience, she said. It's not going to end with Palestine. The American imperial rejection of the ICC is something that doesn't surprise me. I would like to think it would surprise, or it wouldn't surprise, I guess, more Americans. I would like to think that more Americans would expect, though, us to hold to International Criminal Court standards and actually see justice in the world. Of course, the U.S. empire is not interested in justice. It's interested only in exploitation and conquest. But it is of no surprise to me that American capitalist interests are also in line with the current administration and the rejection of the ICC. And this honestly shouldn't be a shock to anyone, even if maybe we'd want it to be. The reason that America backs Israel so much, contrary to what is a disappointingly popular interpretation that Israel controls the United States, or worse, that Jews control the United States, that we have an occupied government, or that the government of the United States is being blackmailed or swayed by Israel, or Israelis, or Jews, is entirely off base. Israel is a European colonial project. The global hegemon is the United States. Israel is an arm of American imperialism. So to counter the, oh, well, the Jews run the world kind of bullshit, remember, They don't even run Tel Aviv. The Americans do. The United States is in control of Israel, and Israel acts under American interests. Now, they do have their own self-interest from time to time that they are generously allowed to pursue, usually at the American expense, because of what they bring to the United States. Weapons testing, surveillance testing, development, and that sort of thing, capital flow, and of course, continued destabilization in the Middle East to ward off Arab unity, Arab nationalism, the Arab Socialist Project that comes and goes, and to continue to allow the Americans to exploit the natural resources of the Middle East, especially presently oil, but also cheap labor. The American interest in the Middle East is long. We have other irons in the fire, such as the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and honestly, much of the Gulf states by now, Egypt to a lesser extent, and countries that did not play with the United States, namely Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Libya, and others we have destroyed or attempted to destroy. Iran has been remarkably resilient against American imperial ambitions. Fantastic for them. Very, very glad that they have been able to resist. Those who have not been able to resist certainly have no fault of their own. It is difficult to withstand the crushing weight of the United States, especially when its little aircraft carrier, its little garrison state, its little Ulster of Israel, it's constantly upsetting the regional dynamics. We have overthrown the Syrian government and established ISIS in charge of Syria now. I don't need to reiterate what happened in 2003 with Iraq or in the 90s with Iraq. We went over that a bit last week. Needless to say, we killed 1.5 million people and stole all their gold and controlled their oil. We have destroyed all semblance of governance in Libya. We are passively allowing the crisis in Sudan right now at the behest of the UAE. We have been attempting to destroy the government and independence of Yemen to conform it to Saudi and Emirati and really American ideals. So the Middle East situation is the fault of the United States, and Israel is just our principal actor in that situation. With this understanding, which somehow has become a little bit more obfuscated as of late, I'm not sure why people in the Palestine movement have had their judgment clouded on this issue as of late. Just read George Habash, go read anything that PFLP have published. Talk to anyone from Palestine, especially in Gaza. They'll tell you that their chief enemy is Western imperialism. But this is why Western capital is so willing to play ball with Israeli interests and with America when it comes to the sanctions and the rejection of the ICC, because it is in their own capitalist interests as well. The imperialist project is a final stage of capitalism. I know we talked about this a bit a few weeks ago, I think. But basically, once there are no new lands to conquer, we have to struggle over the lands that currently exist and exploit what we have there. So the imperialism is that in and of itself, our occupation and continued exploitation of the Middle East for American interests as they reside in the periphery, Israel and semi-periphery, and then the United States is the imperial core. Arguably, maybe Israel counts as part of the imperial core. I don't think that the difference there matters all too much. But it is important to understand that Israel is the right hand of the United States. And the right hand does not control the United States. The United States controls its own hand. And there are a lot of other reasons why and how this works, but that's the important part, is that the United States runs Israel. Without American dollars, Israel falls apart. Without American munitions, Israel falls apart. Without American political support, Israel falls apart. And that also means that the genocide of the Palestinians is an American genocide. We are committing genocide against the Palestinians. We have tried to pass the buck off to Israel to an extent that's been successful, but largely we want us and our right hand to get out of trouble, which is why we don't play ball with the ICC. It is entirely about securing American interests and rejecting global law to the extent that that is real in order to secure our interests. As the one global hegemon, as the only superpower in the world, China's on its way, hopefully, but they are not interested so far in contesting the US at the moment, and nor are they interested in contesting Israel. But as the world's only superpower, we dictate what our so-called allies do. Day-to-day operations, no, but in broad strokes, yes. Remember, Ronald Reagan ended the bombing of Beirut with a single phone call in the 1980s. Biden could have done the same with Israel, but he didn't want to because American capitalist enterprise, and to a lesser extent religious enterprise, but really that's the religious argument is the superstructure that conceals the actual structure of imperialism and capitalism at play there. Biden didn't want to. Trump doesn't want to. Harris didn't want to. They all want to reap the benefits of Israel disrupting, destabilizing, and exploiting the people of the Middle East for American oil interests, for American business interests, and especially for our weapons and war machine programs. War is a huge moneymaker. War is a racket. We all know that from Smedley Butler. If you haven't read his writings, go ahead and do so. He wasn't exactly a socialist, but he was getting there. Too late for my taste, but I also got there too late for my own taste. So go read Smedley Butler's War is a Racket and his other pamphlets on war. And this is what Israel exists to do, and this is why American capital will always choose the side of Israel over the side of the people, because their personal interests, their capitalist interests, are at stake. Hey, did you know that we release this as both a YouTube video and a podcast? Whichever way you prefer to listen, make sure you subscribe. Communist Party's members run for office, strengthening communities and building coalitions. November 6, 2025, via People's World. While Donald Trump and his billionaire backers were working overtime to scare voters into steering clear of Mamdani the commie, actual communists were busy building coalitions and winning elections in cities and towns across the country these past few months. Several members of the Communist Party USA, working as part of a broad campaigns rooted in their communities, won elected office in a number of locales on Tuesday and came very close to victory in some others. Whether they were running for city council, school committee, or a parks board, a common thread among all the candidates was empowering the people in their neighborhoods, towns, and districts to shape their own futures. Working families are being stretched to the breaking point, Daniel Carson, new city councilor in Bangor, Maine, said. They're juggling rising housing costs, low wages, and the daily struggle to make ends meet. It's a theme that repeated in campaign after campaign. Voters were interested in how candidates would take the lead on the issues that matter to them and their kids. They weren't obsessed with political labels. Carson was already a known name in the labor movement across the state, but it took dedication and hard work during the campaign to introduce himself to the broader community in Bangor. He told them point blank that they were the reason he was running. Our working class deserves a city councilor who not only understands these challenges, but is ready to bring people together to find solutions. Once voters had a look at Carson's platform and got the chance to meet him, they liked what they saw. Unaffordable housing also figured prominently in Hannah Schvetz's successful run for city alderperson in Ithaca, New York. People need to have a chance for their wages to catch up with their rents, Schvetz told voters ahead of the polls. In a city where the majority of residents are tenants, it was a message that resonated. We have a government that does not care about working people anymore, a government that only protects billionaires, Schvetz told attendees at a rally recently. That's why I'm running for council. We need a city and country that cares about the average people. In addition to keeping rents affordable, she said other ways local government can show it cares about working class people is to pass a city-specific minimum wage of $25, reform zoning to increase housing supply, keep landlords in line with health and safety standards, fund public transit, and preserve Ithaca's sanctuary status. Showing up, caring, and working with your neighbors, Chevets told her supporters, we can make a difference on our local level. While red baiting of the MAGA variety dogged some of these CPUSA members who ran for office, anti-communist attacks largely fell flat. Voters were more impressed with the track record and commitment of these activists than they were with any divisive and distracting scare tactics. Each of the candidates was known by voters as a neighbor, a co-worker, a teacher, or a fellow organizer. Member of the Communist Party was just another one of the many aspects that defined them. It's really interesting to me to see the fact that Americans are losing their fear of socialism and losing their fear of communism. I think Bernie Sanders has done a lot towards that effort personally. And I think that the efforts of small-time or socialists in America have really pushed that envelope to a point where it's no longer seen as politically unfeasible or as inherently antithetical to American values. I think a lot of Americans still feel this way about communism, and there's a reason why the communist Mamdani and the socialist Mamdani thing had so much pull. There's a reason Cuomo had such a strong race. And we're talking about a city like New York. Imagine how it is out in Missouri. So, I'm not going to start doing a ton of victory laps right now, but I think it's really, really interesting to see that with the end of the Cold War and with the fact that material conditions are just straight up worsening all across America, this fear and hatred and distaste for the concept and identity of socialist, the concept and identity of communist has maybe not gone away, but has decreased. There are a lot of Americans who don't care so much about these titles anymore. Like the article said, what they care about is not political titles. What they care about is political action. And I've seen this in my own life. I encountered a woman on the street who was doing some street cleaning and gardening, city beautification stuff. And she was a Republican. She was a MAGA Republican. And I got talking to her, and I suggested, hey, if you're ever looking for volunteers to help in beautification, you should reach out to people at the DSA. I'm sure that they'd love to get involved. And because through our conversation, she had expressed some approval of some policies that socialists like me would support. And, helping to break the ice. I think that a lot of people, even on the MAGA movement, do so out of a reactionary approach to the failures of liberalism and the failures of society, but without the class consciousness and the social and international awareness that drives someone to being a socialist. I think it might be easier in some regards for a conservative to become a socialist than a liberal, because they're starting off with this distaste for the neoliberal order that they can see as correctly see as hypocritical. But I don't know, maybe I'm way off base with that one. But so I have this conversation with her and I say, hey, you should go check out the DSA. She's like, oh, DSA, what's that? I'm like, oh, it's the Democratic Socialists of America. And her response was, oh, this is almost a direct quote. Socialism, I don't mind. I don't really like the Democrats, though. Being told on the street by a woman in a MAGA hat that she would be a socialist given the opportunity. Of course, I don't know if she knows all that much about what it means, but she's reluctant to participate with the DSA because she misinterpreted Democratic as being the Democrat Party. It was a real eye-opener to me about how people in America perceive or have a relationship with the idea of socialism. Now, I have no idea what she thinks socialism is. Probably her idea of socialism and what socialism actually is are radically different. But I've had encounters with other people who have been progressive, very progressive, and had said that they would be willing to be involved with social democracy or democratic socialists, but have an intense knee-jerk reaction to the idea of communist. That, oh, well, communism is evil. Communism is authoritarian. Communism is, rolling tanks down the streets of Prague. Communism is North Korea. Communism is, whatever other fear factor thing that the American empire lies to you about. And the fact that these are anecdotes, but they reflect, or I feel they reflect, a changing state of American political thought. And I think that the election of open communists, people affiliated with and members of the Communist Party of the United States of America, is really, really interesting and perhaps a really good step forward. And aside about the name, the Communist Party of the United States of America, the CPUSA, a lot of the times we think of parties as belonging to places. So, Democratic Socialists of America, the American Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party. But the reality is that the Chinese Communist Party is actually the Communist Party of China. And similarly, we have the Communist Party of the United States of America, the CPUSA. The reason for this is that the idea is that this is one global unified party, not a party for the state. So the CPUSA is a communist party in the United States, not an American party that promotes communism. It sees itself as an internationalist society and an internationalist party of which it is a branch of. So I think that that's a really interesting way of viewing the world. I think it's a good step towards internationalism. If we see, the Communist Party of China not as being some foreign political entity, but as being our same political entity in another state, I think that's a much better way of looking at the world. And I think it helps bridge the gaps between neighbors rather than seeing each other as strangers, that all citizens of the planet are my brothers and sisters, rather than being strangers or foreigners to me. That's more of an aside. But it's nice to see that people with real progressive, real socialist policies and platforms are coming to office, and that they are taking these names with them. Bernie Sanders, being a socialist, I think broke a lot of barriers as people came to really like him and his policies, and came to understand that the term socialist was not some sort of boogeyman, but rather an actual material principle. And I guess you don't have a material principle, but an actual principled position with material goals. And I think we're starting to see the same thing about communism itself. Now, again, I don't know, maybe Ithaca, New York just happens to have a lot of really young people who are pro-communist or who didn't grow up during the Red Scare. Maybe Bangor, Maine is in the same situation. Maybe these aren't emblematic of a growing change, but just representative of changes in certain places. But we like to remain optimistic. So congratulations to the elected officials, and let's hope we get to see some more socialists, some more communists in office around America. Of course, with the caveat, we're never going to vote our way out of this. And with the way that America is systemically, we could really fill up Congress with communists, and I'm not sure too much would change. The fundamental nature of America needs to change first. Hey, if you like this show, become a member at solidaritytelevision.org. Government shutdown. U.S. Army tells soldiers in Germany to go to the food bank. November 5th, 2025 via Euronews. U.S. soldiers in Germany may not receive November pay amid the prolonged U.S. government shutdown. Emergency funds covered October salaries, but future payments are uncertain. Approximately 37,000 U.S. soldiers stationed in Germany face uncertainty over November's salary payments as the United States enters its longest ever government shutdown, with the Pentagon warning troops may not receive mid-month wages despite last-minute funding for October. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told CBS News that as of the 15th of November, our servicemen and women who are willing to risk their lives will no longer be able to receive pay. The budget impasse between Democrats and Republicans continues. The U.S. Army published guidance on its website directing soldiers in Germany to emergency social benefits, loans, food banks, and food-sharing organizations where volunteers provide leftover food through public fridges. German social benefits remain largely unavailable to U.S. troops, meaning that the soldiers will invariably be left to their own devices. Labor law expert Michael Fulrott said citizens' allowance is legally impossible for soldiers, usually only in Germany temporarily, while NATO regulations prevent German Social Security provisions applying to foreign troops to avoid double benefits. Limited German support exists for parental allowance or child benefit in certain cases, Fulrott noted. The Finance Ministry intervened for approximately 12,000 civilian employees at U.S. military bases, providing 43 million euros for workers in logistics, catering, supplies, and security, as reported by Euronews. The payment represents a loan the United States must repay once a budget freeze lifts. U.S. soldiers received October salaries through emergency funding cobbled from multiple sources: $25 billion from the summer tax cut legislation, $1.4 billion from military procurement accounts, and $1.4 billion from research and development, according to U.S. media reports. An anonymous donor contributed $130 million specifically for soldier salaries and benefits. Pentagon chief spokesperson Sean Parnell told CNN, with Trump reportedly receiving the donation from a friend. Funding proves critical as fewer than 1 in 3 military families have savings of $3,000, according to Blue Star Families, an initiative founded by military personnel. Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune expressed optimism that senators will agree on a budget by week's end, potentially ending the shutdown that began on the 1st of October. Shutdown forces civil servants into unpaid leave, while military personnel await the resolution of the congressional budget standoff. Unlike Germany's monthly payment system, U.S. service members receive wages fortnightly, intensifying cash flow pressures during payment gaps. It's embarrassing, maybe, that the United States spends so much money on its military and we can't even feed our troops in Germany, of all places. Just a little takeaway there. It's the amount that we spend on the military is extraordinarily excessive. And it's all for the continued occupation of half the world. And Germany is no stranger to that. Our troops are in Germany to maintain the ongoing American occupation of Europe that started in 1944 with the invasion of Normandy. Now, does that mean that the invasion of Normandy or the invasion of Germany were wrong? Certainly not. Certainly not. More than happy to see those American troops march through France and then Germany and help liberate Europe from the Nazis. I wish we were actually dedicated to liberating Europe from Nazism rather than just fighting an entity that was an enemy of the United States, because Soviets were also there and they were really dedicated to actually liberating Europe from Nazism. I digress. We put Nazis back in charge of NATO, which is, if we're being honest, the continued U.S. military occupation of Europe. So out of all the countries in Europe, Germany certainly deserves U.S. military occupation. But make no mistake, that is expressly what the U.S. Army does in Europe. Militarily occupies Europe and keeps Europe within the control of the U.S. hegemony and maintains our interests. NATO is an arm of the American empire, and that's what we do with it. We use NATO to destroy Libya, to destroy Syria, to destroy Yugoslavia twice. So, that's its main goal. Its secondary goal is to be a bulwark isn't even the right term, to be an aggressor against Russia, to keep Russian ambitions contained, and not in a way to protect Europe from the big scary Russian bear, but in order to protect American imperial interests from being challenged whatsoever. It's the same reason why we have encircled China with military bases. It's why we have the ongoing U.S. military occupation of Japan and the U.S. military occupation of the South of Korea. It is expressly to apply direct military violent pressure on enemies or even just rivals to American power. North Korea, China, Russia, Iran, chief among them. And now, of course, Venezuela, which has been a rival to American interests for a little bit now, but now we're gearing up to try to do something about it, especially as other parties in South and Central America start falling away from U.S. influence, chief among them Colombia and Brazil as well. So all that to say, if the American troops in Germany wanted to eat, they should just go home. They should come home. Of course, the situation here wasn't exactly much better. A lot of people joined the military because of poverty, in order to escape poverty, or in order to get a step up in life. And that is deliberate. Why do we not have free college? Because it pushes people to join the military. Why do we not have really strong programs to assist the poor? Because it impresses upon people the need to join the military. If joining the military could get you out of the rat hole that you grew up in, well, you're going to look the other way when you're then ordered to murder innocent people in Iraq or Libya or Syria or anywhere else. It promises adventure that you can't get on your own because you're too poor. And that poverty is just part of the exploitation. So you're given the option. You can be stepped on by the boot, or you can wear the boot and step on others. That's why American poverty and exploitation is the way that it is. It creates foot soldiers for empire, quite literally, in order to maintain the ongoing occupation and exploitation of peoples around the globe. And again, Europe is no stranger or no exception to this. Military occupation of Germany. I believe Lithuania is another country that we currently have literal military occupation of. And the others are compradors in that effort. Every NATO country is a player in the ongoing American occupation of Europe. And of course, that occupational pressure on rivals or threats to American interests in Asia and North Africa and the Middle East, which is still part of Asia, but I digress. So poverty in America is part of the imperial project. It drives people to willingly participate in the imperial project. And we're coming right off the heels of Veterans Day here, this is no excuse. Going to Iraq to kill people in order to come home to free college is not an excuse. Going to South of Korea to occupy the country, and even if you're just hanging out and partying, and we know that that's not all that they're doing. I mean, they're polluting the land, occupying the people, mass sexual violence against Korean women, probably against Korean men too, but especially Korean women. And same in Japan. This is exactly what we did in Vietnam. And all of these projects in order to escape poverty, in order to get ahead in America, in order to get college, in order to get benefits, in order to buy a house, with the GI Bill and all that. And this is no excuse. One shouldn't celebrate Veterans Day for this reason. No American veteran after 1945, with the exception of the integration of Little Rock with the 101st Airborne, perhaps, has done anything worth celebrating. Every single one has been part and parcel in the American exploitation of the Global South, made the mistake myself, of the Global South and of the American people in general. Poverty, again. The purpose of poverty is, yes, to extract as much as we can from the American worker, to extract as much wealth as possible from the coal mines of Kentucky and West Virginia and Pennsylvania, and other places you have coal mines, Colorado, Montana. we abuse these gentlemen down in the mines, and women now, and we extract all the excess value, surplus value from them that we can. Yes. And what that does is their way out then is to put on the boot and go stomp on the Iraqis, go stomp on the Libyans, go stomp on the Syrians, go stomp on the Koreans, go stomp on the Japanese, go stomp on the Germans, which, yeah. So that is why I say this is no excuse. If your college education can only be paid for by killing people in the global south, killing innocent people, and waging war, is college something you should have? Very interesting question to ask yourself. If the difference between having healthcare and not having healthcare is murdering people, interesting question. Your average Army enlistee and Luigi Mangione, allegedly, might have two different answers to that question, or same answer with different results. But the measure of a good society and a good life is not whether you can live a long, happy, healthy life. It's if your long, happy, and healthy life does not come at the expense of the Congolese, if it does not come at the expense of the Iraqis, the Yemenis, anyone else in the global south who are our brothers and sisters who we betray, exploit, and abuse in order to get perks at home. If you cannot afford food and the army is your only choice, perhaps we need to create new choices. And of course, that is where the socialists come in. This is why we organize within ourselves, within our own communities, outside of the state, because the state wants you to be poor. It wants you to see your only option for healthcare, for social status, for education, to be abuses, human rights abuses, civil abuses against your brothers and sisters outside of the country. People signing on for ICE to get bonuses are no different from the U.S., from people joining the U.S. Army and blowing up people's houses in Yemen in exchange for a few bucks to go to college. And, we spend all this money on the military, and now we can't even afford to feed them. So I'd love to know, how much they think it's worth it to occupy Europe, abuse people in the global south, murder, rape, steal, in order to then now not get food and rely on food pantries and other people's leftovers, which they could have just done here at home without having to kill anyone for it. Subscribe to our Patreon at solidaritytelevision.org. Space terrorism no longer the realm of science fiction. November 5th, 2025, via Asia Times. Democratization of the heavens has not only opened the door to innovation, but also to cosmic vulnerability. As satellite technology surges ahead and space becomes increasingly accessible to private and state actors alike, the new and unsettling threat of space terrorism looms over Earth's atmosphere. Once the dominion of science fiction, the idea of terrorist activity in outer space is now a growing concern among experts. The democratization of space has not only opened the door to innovation, but also to vulnerability. The current legal frameworks may not be equipped to respond. Over the past decade, the proliferation of commercial space ventures and the reduced cost of developing satellite technology have dramatically lowered the barriers to entry for spacefaring. This shift has empowered not only governments, but also private corporations and, alarmingly, non-state actors. Groups and individuals once considered insignificant in the realm of space security are now capable of launching cyber attacks on satellites and ground stations. In March of 2022, Network Battalion NB65, a group affiliated with Anonymous, allegedly hacked the Russian civilian space agency Roscosmos in protest of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The group claimed control over several satellites, prompting Roscosmos chief Dmitry Rogozin to declare that disabling another country's satellites could be considered a casus belli, a cause for war. While causing minimal damage, the incident underscores a broader trend, the increasing capability of non-state actors to disrupt space infrastructure. It also raises urgent questions about accountability, jurisdiction, and the adequacy of international law. International space law, anchored by the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, was crafted in an era where only a handful of states had access to orbit. The treaty emphasizes peaceful exploration and cooperation, stating that activities in space must align with the UN Charter and promote international peace. However, it lacks explicit provisions addressing terrorism or the actions of non-state entities. Article 6 of the treaty does hold states responsible for national activities in space, whether conducted by government agencies or private entities, but it fails to define non-governmental agencies or outline mechanisms for enforcement. The ambiguity leaves a gaping hole in the legal architecture, especially as private companies increasingly take on roles once reserved for national space agencies. The Liability Convention of '72 offers some recourse for damage caused by space objects, but it too focuses on state actors and does not contemplate ideologically motivated attacks by rogue groups or individuals. One of the most pressing challenges in addressing space terrorism is the lack of a coherent definition. Traditional definitions of terrorism emphasize the intent to coerce a state into action or inaction through violence. But how does this translate to the orbital realm? Some experts propose defining space terrorism as ideologically motivated destruction targeting the space industry. Their definition captures the economic dimensions but omits the national security aspects unique to space. Without a comprehensive definition, acts ranging from cyber intrusions to physical attacks on satellites risk being misclassified or overlooked entirely. These incidents have intensified concern that satellite attacks, whether through hacking, jamming, or physical destruction, will become more frequent and sophisticated in coming years. As space systems become more integrated with Earth-based infrastructure, supporting everything from telecommunications to navigation, the stakes grow exponentially. Experts warn the next decade could see a surge in ideologically motivated attacks on satellites, with devastating consequences for global security and commerce. The UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, UNOOSA, has only begun recently to address space security threats. But without a dedicated legal framework, efforts remain fragmented. One avenue would be to develop transparency and confidence-building measures to cultivate trust and cooperation among state and non-state actors. But data sharing agreements remain difficult to negotiate due to national security concerns. Future research must explore how UNOOSA can support states in crafting domestic laws that address space terrorism. This includes defining what constitutes an act of terrorism in space, establishing protocols for incident reporting, and determining liability for attacks on commercial and civilian infrastructure. Space terrorism is no longer a theoretical concern. It is a tangible threat with real-world implications. As the line between state and non-state actors blurs, and as private companies take on greater roles in space exploration, the need for a robust, adaptable legal framework becomes critical. The question is no longer whether space terrorism occurs, but how the international community responds when it does. Without clear rules, accountability, mechanisms, and cooperative strategies, humanity risks turning the final frontier into the next battlefield. Right off the rip, has to be addressed, terrorism isn't real. Now, we all know some terrorism when we see it, but broadly, what terrorism is, and we've addressed this on the show previously, terrorism is any resistance to American imperial interests. If we start counting off who the United States has counted as terrorists, we're going to see a crazy mixed bag. Ho Chi Minh was considered a terrorist. John Brown, considered a terrorist. Osama bin Laden was considered a terrorist. Really not much argument there, although I will point out that we gave him all the money and to do that stuff anyway in the first place, starting with Jimmy Carter and then really going off with Ronald Reagan. So, whose interest was he serving that anyway? But Nelson Mandela, terrorist. The Black Panthers, terrorists. So if you're going to put Osama bin Laden and Nelson Mandela in the exact same bag with the exact same label, I'm going to assume that maybe you are bad at labeling things. So when we start discussing space terrorism, it's really important to keep in mind that what the state will determine is state terrorism, or space terrorism, state terrorism, yeah. Space terrorism and what might actually qualify as terrorism are largely not going to be the same thing. So if a Palestinian group hijacks an Israeli satellite in order to stop them from broadcasting their propaganda around the world, or in order to broadcast the realities that Israel is a terrorist state, they're going to be labeled as terrorists. But if Israel hijacked a Palestinian satellite to do the exact same thing, that would not be considered terrorism. So, hypothetically anyway, right? Because we don't know. This hasn't happened yet. We don't have a framework to even do so. But it's important to keep in mind, who is talking about terrorism and what that's actually going to look like when the rubber meets the road. And again, that's kind of the whole point of the article is what is that going to look like? How are we going to determine what is and isn't terrorism? Is hijacking a satellite to do broadcasts or to jam broadcasts, is that terrorism? Well, to me, it seems like quite possibly hijacking a satellite and blocking GPS, for example, might not be too different from protesters standing in a road and blocking off a highway. So, at what point are we going to continue to call things terrorism versus legitimate resistance or other such acts of, I don't want to say aggression, but other such acts of self-defense against people or against state bodies that the United States supports, but might be using satellites or other space devices for extreme violence against the people of the world. So again, I'm probably going to hammer this every single time we have a conversation about terrorism. The terrorism, strictly speaking, might not exactly be real. And certainly we have to now analyze the biases of the people making that statement. But let's take the rest of the article in good faith and assume that they and us would have similar opinions about what terrorism constitutes, or that they will have a unified legal framework for what terrorism is that would apply to all parties equally. It is pretty crazy that, terrorism, space terrorism might be a thing of the present, not even of the near future, not of next year, but of the present and of the past. I want to say the first instance or first suggestion of space terrorism was in the 90s. I think 1999, the article initially said. It's one of the first instances of satellites being hijacked. And our reliance on satellites is pretty significant. Your GPS, oftentimes your cellular data and Wi-Fi are all being used to bounce off satellites. The amount of satellites we have in space is wild. If you've seen the movie WALL-E, you know that about space debris, and we're not quite at that stage yet, but it's possibly coming in the future. Tons and tons and tons of satellites. And we do rely on them for a lot of infrastructure and a lot of good things, not just military applications, but GPS is probably the biggest one. I'm pretty sure that airplanes will now use satellite data for flying. I guess I can't say with 100% certainty. I use it when I'm driving. You probably use it when you're driving. And unless you're on a set path like a train, probably going to be using some sort of GPS for a direction or for a journey that you can't make on your own. Driving to and from work is one thing, but driving to and from Canada might be another. Unless you live in Canada or like the Upper Peninsula, I don't know. So the satellite tech, and we use it for radio too, and that's what satellite radio is. Obviously, it's in the name. So all of these things we do rely on, and so satellite and space warfare could be a very real worry for a lot of us in the future. Much like if someone could knock out a bridge in your town from a long distance away. But it's important, again, to remember that what constitutes terrorism is really up for debate. And what I suspect is going to be more harmful than random individual actions is non-state actors such as companies, corporations, using satellites to influence the world, and in order to, bolster their own positions, should we say. This is largely what Elon Musk is doing with Starlink, and his offer of Starlink to Ukraine, for example, was to bolster his own position of power over the state of Ukraine, and things like that. So I think that if we're going to see any real acts of terrorism, it's going to be corporate terrorism and pro-corporate terrorism, to be clear, but corporate-sponsored terrorism, not individual acts of so-called terrorism from people who are resisting the hegemony and influence of the United States. Hey comrade, did you know that the People's Report is only one part of Solidarity Television? If you like the show, you should see what the other videos we have to offer at solidaritytv.org. Hey, thanks for joining us for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytelevision.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.